Alrighty, and welcome back, everybody, to another episode of RE Radar. Once again, I am your host, Nathan Mathisen, and today I am joined with a special guest, the fantastic Hannah Fisher. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I love that intro. I'm gonna start referring to myself as the fantastic Hannah Fisher, like a superhero name. I love it.
Exactly, everyone's got to have one.
hmm
Now, Hannah is both a real estate agent as well as the founder and CEO of Hard Refresh, which is a website design and marketing company. So, with that in mind, today our conversation is going to partly revolve around that connection with how realtors and marketing kind of goes hand in hand together. And I hope that everyone enjoys that, and I hope that it brings you guys value because that's what RE Radar is all about, bringing the audience value. So without further ado, let's just jump right into it. I got a few questions lined up for you, and let's just start it off with kind of how have you utilized that background in design throughout your real estate career?
Yeah, it's such a good question. So what's interesting about my background is I went to school for both business and economics, but I went back to school at a professional arts college. So in my second degree, I learned about all kinds of things from doing perspective drawing to, how to bill clients appropriately. And I really just learned about how to look at things not as your brain perceives them in your like lived experience, but how to really curate the way something looks. So whether that's looking at using some fun design terms, which I always love, if you're looking at like visual weight. So is there something in the room that really draws your attention? Is that what you want? Or do you want to downplay a certain thing in a room? Or when you're marketing, do you want to really bring attention to a certain phrase or a price or something like that? There's really great skills that you learn in design school and as an artist to kind of curate the experience for whoever's interacting with what you've created. So in terms of like design and real estate, it's kind of just a fun creative process for me. I've always really loved it. And I've had some great mentors along the way too who have taught me how to translate those skills into really impeccable interior design and luxury photography and those types of things as well.
One of those things that is big, I know, with you is the idea about photography, and that
Yeah.
does go really with the design. And then with real estate, photography is very important. Could you speak a bit on the impact that good photos could have versus bad photos?
Yes, this is my favorite favorite real estate topic. We could talk about this for like 2 hours. I could create my own podcast on this topic. So cut me off if I'm getting too crazy. So real estate as an industry has evolved, right? Buying and selling property has been around as long as ownership has been around. And with the modern age and digital pictures and buying and selling things online, we have to understand the psychology of buyers. And it's mostly visual. You can look up all kinds of data that state, 99% of people find their home online and then they go see it in person. So photography, especially real estate photography, it translates quality, it translates usability, it translates lifestyle, it translates something that you can take pride in, or maybe the opposite of that. Maybe it's embarrassment of something, right? And oftentimes in real estate, at least this is my experience, every realtor has their own thing, right? Mine is, as you said, photography. It's totally the most important thing to me because I believe it is step one in the process of buying, and it's the final step in the process of selling. So the photography really bridges the gap between the seller and the buyer. And for that reason alone, I think it deserves the most attention from both parties. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the selling side and then I'll talk about the buying side too. So
Perfect.
so if you're a listing agent, you should have photos that speak to your portfolio of work, right? If you're just starting out, that might be a little bit harder, but you can point out photos of homes that you've represented or something like that on the buyer side, or just kind of reference something and say, this is my quality of work, this is what you can expect. And the photos in your portfolio as a listing agent, they're the number one thing that people are going to have an emotional reaction to. The second thing is, do they feel scared when you start talking about contracts? And that's, a topic for another episode of this podcast.
Mhm.
But if you go into a listing appointment and you can say, hey, look, here's, 6 other houses in this neighborhood that are similar to yours. And I've done and then click through the photos of them. And the photos are luxury photos, right? They transcend the preparation work that you put in. It's almost like for a seller who's considering hiring you, they're going to look to that photo and make a judgment on the quality of the experience that they're going to have and the value in the amount of money they're paying for your commission. If you're a seller in this scenario and you're interviewing multiple brokers, always ask to see their real estate photos. Ask them who they hire. Ask them, if anybody says, oh, I just take it with my cell phone, no. And I'll tell
Mhm.
you why, because what that tells me is it tells me that they're not giving it the thought and attention it deserves, right? So the realtors that go around your home and look at it and say, okay, how is somebody going to experience this space? It can be little things like I worked with a broker a long time ago who would move items on a kitchen counter to cover up the plugins, like the outlets,
Mhm.
because she felt like, seeing the plug, we would butt heads on this because she didn't want this like random thing in the picture. She felt like when she got the picture back in post, it was like, here's a gorgeously decorated kitchen, and then there's all these outlets. But for me, I was like, show the outlet.
Mhm.
If you're like me, your kitchen has a toaster and a KitchenAid, and sometimes I get my juicer out, and sometimes I need
Exactly.
one of those like uh,
Emulsifier.
Wendy, yeah, emulsifier. Thank
Yep.
you with the word help. I appreciate it. And so I'm like, dang, the more outlets I have in my kitchen, the better. Same thing with a bathroom, right? So you really want somebody who can speak to looking at your space, thinking about how somebody is going to evaluate whether or not your home is a good fit, and then translating that into an image that tells that story and creates as many different, yes, that could work for me scenarios as
Mhm.
possible, right? Because
Because
ultimately, when you're,
it's the
oh, go
first
ahead.
thing it's the first thing that they're seeing,
Yeah.
and so they're fresh on it. I mean, if they're seeing all these pictures and they're seeing all these things, yeah,
Mhm.
that fits. Yeah, that fits. Oh, yeah, all
Exactly.
these outlets, I left that. That'll work
Yeah,
for me. Then they're much more
exactly.
likely to go and see it in person, which then can lead on to them buying it.
Yeah, exactly. And it's both an evaluation and an inspiration moment. So, sometimes if you've been in real estate for 2 minutes, you've heard, if you haven't experienced this, you've heard it. Someone will go, "Oh, I don't like that color." It's like, well, you can paint or replace that color. It's okay, right? So it's not always about, style, although staging is very important, but it's mostly about functionality. When you ask, like, what is the value in real estate photos? It's creating space for a buyer to see the value in the home. Do the pictures match the price? Can I live in it, both, from an inspirational standpoint and a logistics standpoint? So it's not just like sometimes you'll see photos and I love this pictures. It's zoomed in on the bed and it's like, wow, nice comforter. That tells me nothing about this house. The best real estate photos have great depth of field. They tell a story about the entire space. So somebody can say, okay, the pantry's over here, the bathroom's over there. I know that the bedroom's down the hallway. That works for me. They can kind of get a lay of the land from the photos. And then from the buyer side, when you see photos and I always tell the realtors I'm coaching on their photography is put pictures on the internet that people want to send to their friends. Nothing hurts more than a buyer that's like, man, that house is great. I'm so excited about it, but the pictures suck. I don't even want to send it to anybody. So if you can have some very good photos that people are like, hey, look at this house, I'm putting an offer in. They're texting maybe their best friend, right? Their best friend is going to be like, are you sure? Right? And that's going to create like that trepidation before they enter into a huge contract, right? Or a huge life decision. And so, from a buyer's perspective, when you're looking at photos, look for a home that, or the photos are something you want to send to your friends and family. And I'll speak to this and then I'll shut up about it if you want me to. I look at photos as quality of craftsmanship in like the art of real estate. When I see subpar photos, it tells me that that agent may be a challenge to work with and they're looking to not go that extra mile in other ways, right? So maybe it's they didn't read the contract all the way, or maybe it's, they're going to be a little lax on how they like handle a timeline or something like that. And I think that's important for a buyer listening to your podcast to hear too, is that putting together gorgeous real estate photography is not that hard. It's affordable, it's part of everybody's normal process. And if they're not willing, if the listing agent isn't willing to invest in quality photos, it tells me that they may not be willing to invest in quality elsewhere during the transaction. So when I'm
Exactly.
representing buyers, I pay attention to that type of thing too.
Exactly. I think that kind of goes to the idea about everyone talks about the full service real estate agent. I
Yeah.
think providing those great photos is something any
Hmm.
real estate agent who wants to be good should be doing. As when
I
you have
agree.
those professional photos like you talk about, it's going to help sell that home better. It's going to make it easier to sell when you have better photos because,
Hmm.
like all those statistics say,
Hmm.
almost everybody first sees the home they buy online nowadays. And first
Absolutely.
impressions make or break. Everyone knows about that.
Yep, you nailed it. It's totally a first impression game. And, if your photos are the first impression, they should be the most important part of the real estate process. And any listing agent you hire should be able to speak to that.
Now, talking about some other practices that should be done with listing a home, what are some things that you
Mhm.
kind of preach to your clients about getting their home ready to sell? What are some of the main things you point towards and want them to focus on with that?
Yeah, good segue. So it comes down to prepping for the photos. Shocker. Um, Everybody's different, right? I've never had two transactions that are identical. So when I walk into somebody's home, typically my first questions are, what do you got going on? Like what's making you want to move? It could be anything from aging parents that have been living in the basement and they're moving to, a home of some kind. It could be that their kid just got into college and they want to move to a different state. It could be that they've got a third baby on the way and they need some more space. But there's always going to be some lifestyle logistics. So I base all of my recommendations on that. And I think that's important to call out. Once I kind of understand what they've got going on, I typically recommend decluttering as much as possible. The more you can pre move is what I would like to call it. Although that's the first time I've ever called it that. It's here and now. But if you can sort of
Making
start
it stick now,
packing,
though. You got to
yeah,
keep doing that.
exactly. Yeah, if you can declutter and pack some boxes, that's going to make a big impact. When your home is on the market, people are going to come in and go through all your stuff. And I can't control it. I can try to be there, but I'm not going to be there all the time. So putting away things that are valuable, dangerous, things that are stealable that you don't want stolen. If you have firearms in the house, lock that up and put that away. Same with medication, same with jewelry. None of that should be out. So definitely decluttering and just like prepping your material belongings for an audience. The next thing I would move on to, and again, circumstantial, is, what does this house look like? I worked with a great couple down the street who they've been on my mind a bunch lately. I need to reach out and say hello to them, but they had the cutest little two bed, one bath house, gorgeous trees in the yard. they'd lived there for like 15 years, I think, forever. And they'd finally saved up enough for their dream house and they were so excited. And we went and found them an awesome new home. And then they moved and put theirs on the market. And we made the call to paint. We painted the whole thing, we staged the whole thing. All of their belongings were out. And the only thing left over was they had a garage that was painted bright red. And I was like, this is a very red garage. I'm not sure why you picked this color. I'm here for it. I don't know what went down in here, but maybe we should paint it. And they were out of paint and they were out of time, and it didn't hurt the sale. The rest of the house showed beautifully, but evaluating again the story you're telling with the images is important. And then I tell them to start telling their friends and neighbors is the other thing I do that's maybe a little bit different. I typically do real estate very close to home. I love my neighborhood. I want my neighbors to have the best possible care, and I know I'm the right person to do that. So you can't pre-market in our Northwest MLS, but my sellers can. So I'll say, tell the neighbors, tell your friends, I want eyes on your home. I'll give another good example. Same house down the street. I live 2 blocks away, and one of the values I bring to doing real estate close to home is that I check on your house in the morning and at night. I'll walk the dog or I'll take a bike ride. And one afternoon in particular, my husband and I went we had just gotten mountain bikes and we were like mountain biking through the alleyways in West Seattle thinking we were so cool. And we rolled up, and like did a little skirt in the driveway. I unlock the door, I walk in, I'm wearing all black, a helmet, and then it was pandemic, so I had my mask on. And one of the neighbors called the cops and they were like, they're breaking in, these hoodlums on their bikes are trying to steal things. And I came out, I was like, no, 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 I'm the listing agent. Here's my card. I have the keys. It's all fine. But thank you. Thank you for calling. Like, please call if you see anybody else doing this. And sure enough, actually, somebody did try to break into that listing, which is a whole nother story. I've got a million stories. But yeah, like when you can spread the word with your neighbors and your friends, there's inevitably going to be somebody who is like, hey, my friend Hannah is selling her house. I know you said you were looking. Maybe that's the house for you. Or maybe your house is on the market and your next door neighbor notices that somebody is like, picking at something and they call you up and they're like, do you know that this person's like detaching the spigot from the side of your house? Like, what's that about? So yeah, just getting your community involved is usually my final big recommendation is, get your people looking out for you.
Exactly. And I think something you said right at the start there is really important, especially for this and getting it out here with the podcast about how you've never done the same. No deal's the same. Real estate
Mm-mm.
is so fluid. Every situation is going to be different depending on so many different circumstances. So about
Yeah.
adapting and then figuring out what is going to work best for that exact group is super
Yeah.
important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, going a bit out of order with the questions, I think just because we've been touching on it here a bit with
Yeah.
a past deal of yours. That's something I asked Ian the last time I had a realtor on. I had him
Yeah.
bring in something about a deal he's past done. So I'd love to hear what deal would you like to talk about, something, a note that happened, or just something interesting with it.
Yeah. Well, there's always a story about when I was showing a house and the buyer I was showing a house to shut a door behind us and we were locked out without our shoes on. That's one of my favorite stories, but that's as long as it takes to tell it. Um, so I was thinking about this question ahead of time and having a hard time deciding which of my super fun stories I could tell because you've only heard a fraction of them in the time I've known you. So I'll tell one. So same folks down the street adore these people. So like I said, they saved up. We found them an incredible house down in Federal Way. Their dream house, gorgeous kitchen, and the seller was, I think they were like a spice specialist for HGTV or something like that, and they were on their way to move out of the country. And unfortunately, the listing agent on that transaction wasn't my favorite. There was a lot of inexperience. it felt to me like the sellers were managing the transaction, not the listing agent. I'll say it that way. So when it came time to close, you may or may not know, but closing time is at 9 p.m. day of, and the seller got on a plane and like moved, like left the country, like moved out of the country like that morning. And so, we got the green light. We, title called, everything's moved over, met them down there and gave them their keys and essentially transferred ownership, right? And they had a appointment to get the locks changed the next morning, like at 8 a.m. the next day. And what we didn't realize is that on their way out, the seller had let all their friends know to just come on by the house and pick through anything that was left.
Oh,
So they didn't move out all the way. And they hadn't read the contract that they had signed. And our contract stipulated we had actually quite a long list of items that needed to remain in the house that would transfer ownership along with the property from the seller to the buyer at the time of closing. One of those items was a mini fridge. So we got there, got the keys, checked on everything, looked good, locked up, left, came back the next day, and among many other things, the mini fridge had gone missing. and and I would have never ever in a million years thought that somebody would not only leave their home but leave keys behind, which I'm pretty sure is not allowed,
hmm,
and would think it was okay to, transfer ownership, leave all the stuff in there, and then just have a, unofficial yard sale, basically.
a free
And
for all.
so it was a free for all. Like many, many things had gone missing. And, at the end of the day, it was in the contract. Those people still owe my buyers a mini fridge, in my opinion. And I went to the listing agent and said, do you see this in the contract? Like, this is, I know it's a mini fridge, but it's part of this contract. This is legally binding. And he just said, too bad. And my poor buyers, they're such generous, kind people. They were like, it's a mini fridge, like not the end of the world. They didn't take the gas range or something of true
Hmm.
value. But yeah, it was a frustrating experience for me because
Hmm.
I am very by the book. I read my contracts. I explain my contracts to whoever I'm representing, and unfortunately, there were absolutely no repercussions for the sellers and the listing agent in that scenario. But we got a good laugh out of it, and we
Hmm.
changed the locks, and we kept every other thing. They kept every other thing that was left over, which included some really nice wine that they had forgotten, and so we all got to have some of the nice wine. So,
There we go.
yeah, there's nothing better than having wine, really good wine left over in a house and sharing it with your buyers.
Hmm. It's actually kind of funny that that's the story you bring up because something Ian touched on was with
Hmm.
one of his deals he had a fixture like a towel rack, like a
Hmm.
custom handmade bourbon barrel towel rack.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
the sellers decided, actually, before it closes, we're taking those. So they took those before it
closed.
closed.
Yeah,
And the buyers were like, well, I thought those were going to be there. So it's
yeah.
always just about all the details, the small little details with the contract, and how
Hmm.
the smallest of things can be something that impacts. In your case, thankfully, it
Yeah,
didn't impact the deal, but you
yeah.
never know what's going to be that little hang up
That
that could
little thing.
kill
Yeah,
the whole thing.
it's true, and I think it's so important as realtors to prep your clients that, in our industry, there's really, really good agents, and there's some agents that know that there's maybe not as much accountability as there should be. And so I prep all of my clients, something's probably gonna go wrong. There's probably gonna be some frustration here. My team sold I think it was like close to $8 million waterfront listing on Lake Washington, and it had a Chihuly chandelier in it. It was so gorgeous and so cool. It was like pink and yellow and stunning. And I, in thinking about doing this podcast with you, I was like, I wonder what happened to that chandelier. And they have since torn that house down. like I drove by it last week or like last month, and I was like, oh my God, that house is gone. So like you just who knows?
Yeah.
Like
Who
you
knows?
never
Who
know what's
knows
gonna
where that
happen.
chandelier is at? It could be in the ground.
Could be. They were just like, we have so much money, we don't need this $8 million house. We're just gonna
Mhm.
bury the Chihuly in the yard,
Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Hannah. I think this has been
Yeah,
a really informative and some great information for the listeners. So thank you.
you're so welcome. Thanks for having me.
Of course. And thank you to the listeners for watching. Thank you for listening and have a great rest of your day and see you next time.